Afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. I hope you're recaffeinated. We have a great afternoon session, and we wanted to start this afternoon with a very special guest. Jen Easterly is the director of CISA. Jen, welcome.
Thank you.
And for those of you who joined us virtually last year, you'll remember she joined us as well, and she was just new to the job. So now she has just about a year at CISA, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that year's been like, where it's going, and how we can help. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with the whole DHS structure, you know, CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And Jen, can you tell us more about the agency, its mission, and your role there?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here with you. Thanks for the opportunity. How many people here are familiar with CISA? Just raise your hand a little bit. Oh, good. Fantastic. So we are the newest agency in the federal government. We were created at the end of 2018, really to be America's cyber defense agency. And we were established by Congress and given increasing budget and resources and responsibilities over the last 3.5 years. So I'm glad everybody knows who we are. Hopefully, you know what we do and the value we bring. You know, it's interesting. My career started out in the U.S. Army, and then I was in the intelligence community. I was in the policy community doing counterterrorism. And those are areas where the federal government arguably has monopoly power, whereas in the work of cybersecurity and homeland security, the federal government is just another partner with our state and local colleagues and with private sector, with industry. And so making sure that we are building collaborative partnerships with businesses large and small, with our colleagues in state and local government is critical to our success in our mission, which is effectively to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the critical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. And Mark, when we say critical infrastructure, it sounds like a bit of a wonky term. Infrastructure, that's something that somebody else does. But really, it's just the systems, the network, the data that we all rely upon. It's transportation, communications, power, water, finance. And so these are really systems that must be protected and defended, but the government doesn't own very much of them. And so that partnership where we provide resources and tools and information to ensure that everyone understands how to drive down risk to their business and thus to the nation is the business that we're in. And that's why partnerships and resilience in particular are so core to our mission. So as we're talking up here, you'll have the opportunity to ask a question through the app. So for those of you who have downloaded the app and Director Easterly, we want to make sure that we're pretty sure that everyone can multitask here, right? So please ask questions through the app. Through the magic of technology, they'll pop up on this iPad, and I'll get to ask Director Easterly those questions. So please do that. Also, while you're with your devices, you're very active on Twitter. Ish, yeah.
Well, she almost has 41,000 followers. I think well, if everyone in this room...
You must follow me very closely.
If everyone jumps on and follows her on Twitter, we'll go over 41,000. We'll call that a good victory for the day. So please do that as well. But looking at your Twitter feed, we did see that you talk a lot about best practices, and you share it with the public, both as individuals but also with organizations. And one of the best practices that you've been really strong on advocating is around MFA, like multi-factor authentication, and I do it, you know, through all the different accounts I have. My kids do not want to do it through the accounts that they have. Why is it so important, and is it taking hold here in the U.S.?
So Mark, you know this is a subject near and dear to my heart, so you sound like you're an avid Twitter follower, so thank you for that. I try and make my Twitter account both interesting, fun, and informative. So, but one of the things I talk a lot about is cyber hygiene, those cyber best practices that we all need to be doing to keep ourselves and our kids safe online. And so let me just get a show of hands. How many people know what multi-factor authentication is? Awesome. How many people have it implemented for all your sensitive accounts? Pretty good. So, you know, at the end of the day, if there's one thing that you do, one thing you take away from this discussion, please implement multi-factor authentication on all of your sensitive accounts, on your email, on your bank account, on your social media accounts. And if your bank is telling you you can't implement, or a business is telling you, well, they don't have that as an option, tell them that they should. Because what research shows is this is the best thing to do to protect your accounts. There's research from Microsoft that shows that it makes you 99% less likely to get hacked, which is incredibly important. And frankly, it's a pretty simple step you can take. It's not seamless. It's not frictionless. We want to come at it from the other end, where technology companies actually build their technology to make sure it's seamless and frictionless. But MFA, incredibly important. The other things that I would recommend are ensuring your software is always updated. And if you're running enterprise, making sure that vulnerabilities are patched, making sure you're training your teammates to understand what phishing is and to recognize a phishing email. And the last thing is get a password keeper and differentiate your passwords. So those 4 things are fundamental to keeping yourself safe online, and really are kind of the benchmarks for cyber hygiene. So highly recommend all of those.
Well, we can learn more about that at CISA Jen is her Twitter handle. So please follow her. But also on your website, right? So CISA has a lot of different resources. And we have both big companies in this room and we have smaller businesses. The larger companies, you know, they either outsource or they have teams in place, and they are implementing a lot of these things. But if you're a smaller business, what do you do?
It's a great question. You know, we were built to be, and we are, America's cyber defense agency. But from a national security perspective, we work with critical infrastructure, those 16 critical infrastructure sectors across the board. Some of them are very big companies, but there are some small entities that are part of critical infrastructure. Some of the hospitals that we've seen suffer ransomware attacks, things like schools. So we want to make sure that our messaging is getting out as broadly as possible. Also because even if you're a big company, you may be connected to vendors or have something in your supply chain that is not necessarily considered critical infrastructure, but ultimately is at the end of the day. And so we are working really with businesses large and small. And if you go to our website, which I highly recommend everybody does, because we are really building it to be as valuable and as effective as possible for all of our stakeholders. So one thing that I would ask all of you to do is take a look at that and give us feedback. We are a feedback-first agency. One of my principles in life is to treat feedback as a gift. So would really ask you all to take a look at that. What we're trying to do is make things simple and actionable. And so last week I spoke at Goldman Sachs, had a 10,000 Small Businesses Annual Summit, which was a terrific platform to reach our small businesses across the country, which are, you know, I really think are the engine of our economy. Bring 99% of the people in America are employed by small businesses. And so what we did was we created a whole separate page at CISA.gov/small-business. And on there, some very simple guidance on what you can do to build your security program, knowing that the median number of employers in a small business is about 10. So what you do as a leader, what you do as a security program manager, what you do as the IT person, even if you're the IT person and also the finance person and the HR person, there's some basic things that you need to do to ensure the security and resilience of your network. So we just put that up. If you're a small business, or really any business that deals with small businesses, please take a look at that and please continue to give us feedback. The other thing that's on there, as well as our Shields Up page that we put together to help raise the awareness on the threat environment in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is a lot of free services, free tools and services, both from CISA, but also ones that are offered pro bono from our technology partners. So please take a look at that as well.
And again, looking at your Twitter feed, I saw that you recently met with the Ukrainians. They must have had some pretty good lessons learned.
Yeah, it was, thanks for asking about that. We had 13 folks from Ukraine come to visit us from their cyber agency, their law enforcement agency, their national police. And we met with them, I want to say probably 2 days ago now. And sitting across the table from these folks, I choked up a little bit just thinking about the incredible resilience, what they're dealing with this just brutal onslaught, this unprovoked invasion by Russia. And I was just incredibly impressed by their fortitude and really just admire them, frankly. One of the things that we have been very pleasantly surprised about over the past 6 months is how they have evolved in their capability to defend their networks and their critical infrastructure against Russian cyber attacks. It's probably not surprising when you think deeply about it because Russia has been using them as a bit of a sandbox for cyber aggression going back 6-7 years now. And so by necessity, they've gotten better and better at this. Also because we have developed close partnerships both with CISA, but across the federal government, as well as with industry. And so we were actually working with UA CERT. We also serve as US CERT, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team. So we've been working with UA CERT for several years now to help build their capacity. And before the invasion and throughout, we've been working with them to share information, to provide them what we know, and to help them understand what they need to do to drive down risk to their networks. But they've been doing a pretty impressive job. And so, as you said, we were excited to sign this memorandum of cooperation to deepen our information exchange, our capacity building, and our lessons learned from what they're dealing with in Russia, because even though we have not seen, touch wood, a major Russian cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure, we know that Russian cyber attacks are a part of their playbook. And so we need to all keep our shields up and continue to take all the steps that we can take to ensure the security of our nation.
And having been at CISA for a year, another thing that's a year old at CISA is the Joint Cyber Defense Collaboration. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is and how the private sector is involved?
Yeah, thanks for asking. How many people have heard of the JCDC? Anybody? So if you're familiar with something called the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, it was set up a couple years ago, some fantastic leaders on that, to include my teammate Chris Inglis, the National Cyber Director. And it came out with a series of recommendations, probably about 80 at the beginning of, or at the beginning of 2020, actually. And many of them found their way into legislation, the defense bill from 2021. One of the most valuable, I think, was called the Joint Cyber Planning Office. And the idea was to bring the federal government together with industry to plan against the most serious threats to the nation and then implement cyber defense operations to drive down risk. And so when I got into the job last July, one of the things I was most excited about was implementing this recommendation for a Joint Cyber Planning Office. Now, when I started saying JICPO, that didn't really sound so good, JICPO. And I'm a big 80s music fan, so I actually wanted to call it the Advanced Cyber Defense Collaborative at first, but the lawyers didn't love that. And so we went with the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or the JCDC. And what this does, it's actually really interesting and important. It brings together, it's the only cyber entity that by law, by legislation, brings together the full power of the federal cyber ecosystem on one platform. So industry doesn't have to figure out, oh, where do I go to get to the FBI or to CISA or to NSA or to Cybercom or to the Director of National Intelligence. You come to one place, one platform, to be able to deal with all aspects of cyber defense. And so we've been working on that over the past year. I think it's been going really well. Some of that is because the capabilities that we're putting in place there have been accelerated both by something called Log4Shell, which is a very serious vulnerability that was discovered in December, very ubiquitous. And so we worked very closely with our JCDC partners to illuminate that risk and to provide mitigation guidance against it. And then with Ukraine, we work with what's called the JCDC Alliance, which are 25 of the biggest technology partners in the world, to come together to identify the dots of malicious cyber activity, to connect those dots, to drive down risk to the nation. We also began working with the big financial companies, the big energy companies, and so what you should see if you subscribe to our cybersecurity alerts, which I highly recommend, is essentially the enriched product of all of these relationships that we have with industry that has, because of their global visibility, an incredible amount of knowledge about malicious cyber activity, as well as what we're seeing from our federal government partners and what we're seeing from our international partners. So you can think of this as raising cyber awareness, doing joint risk analysis, and then doing planning to enable us to drive down cyber risk. And so I think it's going pretty well. It's only a year old, but we've been doing some really unique things with it. And just using a simple sharing tool like Slack has actually, interestingly, been really revolutionary for bringing together government and the private sector in a way where government must be, by design, much more responsive, much more transparent, and aiming to be value added in every engagement that we have, which is really our goals at the end of the day. We don't want to be a black box where information comes in and you never see anything back. We want to be value added and responsive. And really, at the end of the day, Mark, it's about turning the plain old public-private partnerships that we've been talking about for decades now into true operational collaboration, where we do feel like it is a really valuable partnership and engagement, and that engagement is going on in real time, not just every month or so when you go get a briefing from the government.
Well, that's really interesting. We're going to go more into that in a minute. But I have to say, if it was the Advanced Defense Cyber Collaborative, just think of the walk-up music you would have.
I already get that walk-up music.
Okay. No one else get that joke? Okay.
I know my standard walk-on music is Thunderstruck.
Nice.
Yeah. For a variety of reasons, for those of you who know some insider cyber stuff.
She might be the coolest person in government. What do you think?
Can you say that in front of my son? I should have invited my son to this thing. Unfortunate.
All right, so let's talk about private-public partnerships. And we have a lot of companies in the room. You talked about one way they can be involved. What should we be doing as the private sector, working with government at different levels in different parts of the federal government, but also with each other?
Yeah, so, any partnership, whether it's a business partnership, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a public-private partnership, is only going to work if you have one thing, and that's trust, right? If you don't trust each other, if you are not assuming that you are going to get value out of that partnership, if you don't believe that that partner is going to safeguard your interests, safeguard your data, safeguard the reputation of your business, which I'm sure all of you are very focused on, it's not going to work. And people don't trust institutions. People trust people. And so we have been working very, very hard. It's one of the reasons why I try and use social media to not be this, institution out there, but to actually be a real person, both because I want people to feel very comfortable in reaching out to us. We try very hard to be responsive to all of the outreach that we get, but we're also trying to build our brand so that we can continue to recruit great talent. We've gotten a bunch of funding over the past 3 years, and we're going to continue to build. But it's really important that people see us as an accessible, cool agency where they want to work because, again, we're here in the business of defending the nation. So, it starts with trust that's built on engagement. It's built on solving problems together. It's approaching any partnership with humility, frankly, and gratitude in terms of how we are sharing things because, frankly, the government can get just as much, if not more, from the private sector that the private sector gets from government. And so we are in the business, it's really core to our DNA, is collaborative partnership. So I would ask all of you, if you don't already work with CISA, please come to us and help develop that relationship. If you're not a huge company or a critical infrastructure provider, it doesn't matter. We can do information sharing agreements with all partners to ensure that you get what you need to protect your systems, your networks. If you are not located in this area, if you're somewhere within the regions, hopefully you just heard from my awesome director of the Integrated Operations Division, Bridget Bean. She has upwards, we're growing out there, 1,000 people out there in the regions working cybersecurity, protective security, and those are people that are on the front lines to work with you. So there's numerous ways to partner with us. If you have folks that want to come work at CISA, we just launched a new program called the CISA Cyber Innovation Fellows, where people from the private sector can come work with us as a CISA teammate to learn what we do, and we can learn from them, whether it's on our vulnerability management or on our partnerships team or on our threat hunting team. So there are so many ways to partner with us, and I would ask all of you to consider that if you're not already doing it, because at the end of the day, government can't do this alone, the private sector can't do this alone. This has to be about collective cyber defense.
And let's talk about what success looks like, right? You all have implemented cybersecurity performance goals, and tell us more about that. So what does good look like?
It's a great question, and it's one of the hardest questions. How do you measure risk, and how do you measure the reduction of risk? Before I came to CISA, our mission was to lead the national effort to understand and manage risk. And frankly, I just thought that wasn't good enough for the nation, given the stakes of the threat environment. So we very deliberately changed it to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the critical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. Now, what that means is we have to understand how to measure risk so we can say whether we're driving it down. And shortly, we're going to release our strategic plan, our first one, that lays out sort of representative outcomes. And then we're going through a whole exercise on measurements of not just performance, but measurements of effectiveness on how you drive down risk. And that also needs to be a very consultative and approach that we work with private sector who have done a lot of thinking on this as well. I know from my time at Morgan Stanley, we did a lot of thinking about how do you actually measure all the investments that you are making, so when you have to defend those investments, you can say this is what we actually did with it. And so that is not as advanced as I'd want it to be, but it's another effort that we need to work on together. The cybersecurity performance goals that you mentioned, I think are going to be a really important part of that. Some of you may have heard of the NIST cybersecurity framework that was implemented several years ago to essentially lay out how we can align our processes to various things that we need to do to articulate risk. How do we identify threats, protect against them, detect them, respond, and recover? What was sort of missing from this framework is how do we actually prioritize what we're doing based on who we are as a business, and then how do we measure what we're doing in a very actionable way. So last August, the White House asked us to work with NIST to build on that framework to lay out cybersecurity performance goals for both information technology as well as operational technology. First, a baseline of CPGs, and then CPGs by sector. And so if you go to our website and you look up CPGs, we put out the latest ones. We're asking for comments by August, but we want to use these to actually drive incentives and align behaviors around risk reduction across the country. Now, these are very focused on critical infrastructure that is systemic to our national security and our economic prosperity and public health and safety, but they're a tool that any business can use to help you measure the reduction of risk.
And with that, tell me more about, and we're getting a bunch of audience questions, so thank you all. We're going to get to these in a second. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we want to save some time for all of these. But while I go through these, can you just give us a really good, crisp call to action for this group? And then we'll get to the audience questions.
Well, first of all, implement MFA. Enable MFA and have your friends and family and your kids and your parents do it. So that's one call to action. But more importantly, another call to action that's really predicated on what I've been saying, that we are all part of the collective cyber defense of the nation. The threat environment that we face is increasingly complex, increasingly dynamic, where highly sophisticated nation-state actors from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and increasingly sophisticated cyber criminals, some of which are given safe haven by these nation states, some of which are sponsored and affiliated with these criminal gangs. And we've seen this epidemic of ransomware affecting businesses large and small across the country. So my call to action is come work with us. Come be part of that collective cyber defense of the nation, whether it's working as a part of CISA, one of our partners, working with our teams out in the regions to help drive down risk to businesses. There are so many ways that we can partner together, and your feedback can help make us the best cyber defense agency for our nation and the best cyber defense agency in the world. So that would be the very simple call to action, Mark.
Well, thank you. And looking at the questions, one question that has a recurring theme in this is, we know what the risks are now, but looking down the road, 3 to 5 years, what is it going to look like then? And what do we do about it?
Yeah. So I don't think the risks are going to look that terribly different. They'll probably be the next variant of whatever ransomware is going to look like in 3 to 4 years. But we are still going to be dealing with nation-state actors and cyber criminals that are trying to use tools to break into our networks, to steal our data, to disrupt our operations, to destroy our data. And I think cyber will become an increasing part of how nation states look to hold each other at risk as nation states and non-nation state actors become more sophisticated in cyber. I will say I think we have a very unique opportunity now as we build our relationships, our partnerships, as we've been trying to do for years now, but I really feel like we are accelerating our ability to make these partnerships more valuable. I think we have an ability to focus on what this whole entire summit is about, which is resilience, right? We can all come together and we can respond and we can help recover and we can share information. That's sort of the heart of this new cyber incident reporting legislation, is enabling us to understand the ecosystem. But what we really need to come together on is focusing on what I call, as a retired Army officer, left of boom. How do you build resilience? Knowing that there will likely be a breach, be an incident, be a disruption. How are you building your networks? How are you protecting your data? How are you changing your people so that you are a resilient system that can then drive down risk and allow you to respond and recover and mitigate that risk as rapidly as possible? And I'm sure we have a lot of business leaders in here, and going back to your other question on a call to action, at the end of the day, we all need to realize that cybersecurity, cyber risk is not the purview of your security team. It's not the purview or responsibility of your information technology team. If they own your risk, then you're in a pretty bad place. It has to be led by your CEOs and your top leaders, and CEOs need to realize that cyber risk is just as existential as franchise risk or market risk. And so it really needs to be a cultural shift in mindset of how we're going to partner together to drive down this risk. So whatever threats we're dealing with 5 years from now, we have made a substantive effort in making the nation safer.
I'm really glad you brought that up, that it really comes from the top. And we see it not just with risk on cyber, risk on critical infrastructure, but we see it on other issues like sustainability and diversity, equity, inclusion, that it really can't reside with that officer, that one person, that one group, but it's got to be a system-wide, company-wide effort. So thank you for bringing that up. We haven't talked a lot about state, local, tribal. And we do have state and local and tribal emergency managers as part of this group. And what is their role in working with CISA and working with the private sector? And how do you see them fitting in?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Because I spent the first part of my career mostly in national security, a lot of time overseas when I was in the service, I did not get a chance to work too extensively with state and local. And I will say that's probably one of the most funnest parts of this job. I absolutely love traveling around the country to the regions, meeting with state and local officials who are at the center of defending their government networks, but also many of the public utilities, and then very importantly, engaging with secretaries of state who are in many cases election officials. And as some of you probably know, CISA serves as the sector risk management agency for election infrastructure. So we spend a lot of time with state and local election officials who are responsible for obviously running elections. The federal government does not do that, but we want to make sure that election officials have the resources that they need to deal with the increasingly complex threat environments, physical threats to election officials, cyber threats to systems, insider threats, and then increasingly threats of misinformation and disinformation. And so those partnerships, which frankly, I have to give huge credit to my predecessor, who worked very hard to create highly collaborative partnerships with the election community. But that's one of the funnest things we do. We obviously work very closely with all of the emergency management officials, with the mayors, with the governors, and my regional directors. I have an SES in every region aligned with the FEMA regions. If you are out in the regions, if you're a state and local official or an emergency management official, please make sure that you know who your regional director is, who your senior protective security advisors are, your senior cybersecurity officials, because they are standing by to help. And so incredibly important. We're putting a lot in the field. We're going to grow there over the coming years, and I'm excited about continuing to strengthen those partnerships.
And following up on that, how do they get in touch with them? And earlier today, we heard from the director of the National Weather Service, Ken Graham. He said, look, we have 110 offices across the country with meteorologists who can help business and help emergency managers understand the weather and see the threats over the horizon, engage with us. And it was an open offer for all of us to engage with the Weather Service. And now you have an open offer for us to engage with CISA. Like, how do we do that?
So if you go to our website and you look up the regions, it'll show you how to get in touch with every single region. If any of you have problems doing that, just reach out to me, CISA Jen on Twitter, and we'll get you linked up with the right folks.
You have to follow her first.
Yeah. See, it's a good question, right? Because if you're not in the government, oftentimes it's how do I get a hold of that person? And sometimes you'll reach out to the website and nobody will get back to you. And we are trying to change the culture where we are incredibly responsive to anybody that reaches out to us. But I know that my 10 regional directors and Bridget Bean, who you heard from earlier, and her deputy, Boyden Roner, are very much of the mindset that we are here to respond and be helpful. So please check that out and let us know if you can't find the right person.
We will. Couple minutes left. Recurring question also. What keeps you up at night? What is worrying you the most? And again, is there a private sector solution as part of that?
I always get this question. I've gotten in my whole career, and I don't like it very much. But thank you for asking. I can
go to another
anyway. Because at the end of the day, it's not what keeps me up at night. Really, it's what wakes me up in the morning. And that's to do what is this really fantastic opportunity to help defend the nation. And I've done a whole bunch of different things in my life, and I am very much a believer that if you wake up in the morning and you don't love what you do, if you don't admire your teammates and feel empowered by your bosses and feel like you're making an impact every day, like go do something else. And that is CISA's culture. In one phrase, frankly, but I will really answer your question, though, Mark, because I like you. So what I worry about long term is I really think that over the next decade, the West, led by the U.S., can win or lose the battle for technology innovation to China specifically. So when you think about what's going on with respect to quantum, artificial intelligence, biotech, all of the things that are going to happen over the next 10 years and where we're going to end up in terms of who will be able to make the most of data around the world who will own the next generation of networks, 6G, because I think we've sort of lost the battle for 5G networks, frankly. I think we really need to invest very heavily, which is why I'm excited about the potential passage of the CHIPS Act, because I think that's hugely important. But we need to invest research dollars. We need to invest in our people. Because if we don't, I feel like we will really have lost that opportunity to keep our edge on technology innovation. And I think that that will be to the long-term detriment of America as the global superpower. And so these are things where I spend a lot of time thinking strategically about how we can make a difference there. But generally, I tend to be an optimist, so I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Well, we're optimistic too because you're at CISA and you have such a great team, and we have great partners around the room. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Director Jen Easterly.